Nobody builds a billion-dollar company the way it gets described afterward. There is no single genius idea, no app that goes viral overnight, no venture capital check that changes everything in one meeting. That version of the story sells well because it is short and dramatic, but it is almost never true. The real path is longer, less glamorous, and built on a mechanism most people never bother to learn, which is how one profitable business can quietly turn into an empire of businesses, each one funding the next. This is not a story about luck. It is a story about ownership, cash flow, and the discipline to reinvest instead of spend. You are about to walk through it stage by stage, with real dollar milestones attached, from a single small business worth nothing on paper to a collection of companies worth $1 billion. No shortcuts, no lucky breaks, and no clever exception to the rules that everyone else has to follow. Just the mechanics of how capital compounds when it is allocated well, over and over, for a long time. Think about the usual framing people use when they imagine this kind of growth. Company becomes holding company, as if the leap happens in a single step. The real progression looks nothing like that. It looks like cash flow turning into ownership, ownership turning into acquisitions, and acquisitions eventually becoming an empire, with years of unglamorous work sitting inside every arrow of that chain. This is not a tutorial about starting a business. It is closer to a simulation of how wealth actually compounds once ownership and capital allocation become the center of the strategy instead of an afterthought. Step 1. One profitable business. Every empire starts with a single business, not 10. You find a real problem worth solving, something people already pay for, and you build a company around solving it well. You focus on recurring revenue instead of one-time sales, because predictable income is worth more than a big spike that never repeats. You keep the business profitable from early on, resisting the temptation to burn cash chasing growth you cannot yet support. Most importantly, you keep ownership. You do not give away large chunks of the company just to move faster, because ownership is the entire point of everything that comes later. This first stage takes years, and most of it looks like ordinary small business work. You hire your first employee. You survive your first profitable year. You eventually cross your first $1 million in revenue, a milestone that feels enormous the day it happens and strangely small a few years later. By the time this business is worth roughly $500,000, you have learned the one lesson that everything else depends on, which is that a business without consistent cash flow is not actually an asset. It is a job with extra risk attached. Plenty of people stop right here, and it is worth understanding why. Running one profitable business is already hard, and once it starts working, the natural instinct is to protect what you have rather than risk it chasing something bigger. There is nothing wrong with staying at this stage forever. Most successful small business owners do. But the empire builders are the ones who look at that first stable business and ask a different question, which is not how do I make this business bigger, but how do I use this business to build the next one? Step 2. Predictable cash flow. Somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million, your thinking changes. Instead of spending profits as they arrive, you start treating cash flow as fuel rather than income. You reinvest in operations. You work to increase margins instead of just increasing sales. You build reserves so the business can survive a bad quarter without panic. Most founders spend their energy chasing revenue, watching the top line climb while the bottom line stays thin and fragile. Empire builders think differently. They obsess over free cash flow. The money left over after everything the business needs has already been paid for, because that leftover money is what eventually buys the next business. This stage rarely gets talked about because it is not exciting. There is no headline in a founder quietly building cash reserves for 2 years, but this is where the entire future strategy either becomes possible or does not, and skipping it is the reason many businesses that look successful never turn into anything larger than themselves. Step 3. The first acquisition. Somewhere around $2 million, a different idea starts to take shape. Instead of starting a second business from scratch, you consider buying one that already exists. A local service business with steady customers. A small manufacturing company with outdated systems but real demand. An accounting firm with a loyal client base and an owner ready to retire. A niche software company nobody outside its small market has ever heard of. Buying an established business is often faster and less risky than building a new one, because the hardest parts, finding customers and proving the model works, have already been done by someone else. This is the foundation of what is often called the buy and build strategy, the same approach used by many of the largest and most successful business groups in the country. Your first acquisition does not go smoothly. Negotiations drag on longer than expected. The seller gets nervous and nearly walks away twice. Your due diligence uncovers a problem with the books that almost kills the deal entirely. You spend nights wondering whether you are about to make the biggest financial mistake of your life, taking on debt and risk to buy something you did not build yourself. You close the deal anyway because you have done the math enough times to trust the math over the fear. By the time this business is integrated and stable, your combined companies are worth roughly $10 million, and you have learned a lesson no amount of reading could have taught you, which is that acquiring a business is fundamentally different from building one, and both skills matter. Step 4. The holding company. Somewhere between $10 million and $50 million, the structure of everything changes. Instead of owning each business personally, you create a holding company that owns the businesses underneath it. This is not just a legal formality. It separates ownership from daily operations, protects assets from risk in any single business, and allows capital to move efficiently between companies instead of being trapped inside whichever one happens to generate it. The holding company does not sell products. It owns businesses that do. This distinction matters more than it sounds like it should, because it marks the moment you stop thinking like the allocator of capital across many. This is also the point where cash flow stops being something you personally manage and starts becoming something closer to a partner, quietly working in the background, always looking for where it is needed most. Step 5. Businesses funding businesses. This is where compounding actually begins. Between $50 million and $150 million, something shifts that changes the entire trajectory of the empire. Each business you own generates profit. Instead of distributing that profit or leaving it idle, you reinvest it into acquiring another business. Now every acquisition increases the cash available for the next one, and growth stops depending on any single company succeeding on its own. This is the same mechanism that makes a small monthly investment turn into a large portfolio over decades, just operating at a business scale instead of a personal one. Every company helps finance the next company. A slow year in one business no longer threatens the entire structure, because 5 or 6 other businesses are generating cash at the same time. You are no longer betting everything on one bet. You are running a portfolio, and portfolios are far harder to destroy than single businesses are. Step 6. Systems instead of yourself. Between $150 million and $400 million, the founder's role has to change, or the entire structure eventually breaks under its own weight. You cannot personally run 6 businesses the way you ran one, so you stop trying. You hire experienced chief executives for each company. You build strong management teams underneath them. You measure performance with clear numbers instead of daily involvement, and you shift your own attention almost entirely to capital allocation, deciding where each dollar should go rather than how each task should get done. This transition is harder than it sounds, and it costs something real. For years, your identity was tied to being the person who built the first business with your own hands, who knew every customer and every problem personally. Letting go of that control feels like a small loss, even as the empire grows larger than it ever could have with you still in the center of every decision. There is a quiet loneliness in this stage that nobody mentions in the success stories, the discomfort of watching someone else run the thing you built, trusting a system instead of trusting yourself. You catch yourself checking in on decisions that are no longer yours to make, second-guessing hires you approved yourself, and wondering whether stepping back was really progress or just a slower way of losing the thing you spent years building. Some founders never make peace with this stage, and they either quietly take back control, shrinking the empire back down to something they can personally manage, or they burn out trying to hold on to both roles at once. The ones who make it through recognize that their value shifted from doing the work to designing the environment where the work gets done well without them, and that recognition, once it settles in, changes how they measure their own success for good. Great empires are not built by doing everything personally. They are built by designing systems that keep working when you are not in the room, and that lesson defines nearly every large holding company that has ever existed. Step 7. The acquisition machine. Between $400 million and $800 million, acquisitions stop being occasional events and become a repeatable process. The organization now has a dedicated acquisitions team searching for opportunities continuously. It has legal and finance specialists who can move quickly when a good deal appears. It has due diligence processes built from years of hard lessons and integration playbooks that turn what used to be chaotic first acquisitions into a routine, predictable process. The question the organization asks has changed completely. It is no longer how do we grow, it is which business should we acquire next. Banks begin offering financing on better terms because the track record now speaks for itself. business owners start approaching the company directly, hoping to sell, because word has spread that this buyer treats acquisitions fairly and keeps businesses running well after the deal closes. What once required years of searching and convincing now happens because opportunity is finding its way to you, instead of the other way around. This stage also marks the first time the empire starts to feel less like a collection of separate businesses and more like a single organism with many parts. A logistics company you acquired years earlier now moves inventory for a consumer brand you bought last quarter. A software company inside the portfolio quietly builds tools that several other businesses in the empire end up using. None of this was planned from the beginning, but it emerges naturally once enough businesses sit under the same roof, sharing resources and expertise in ways that no single business could ever access on its own. This kind of quiet synergy becomes another advantage that compounds alongside the raw financial numbers, one that rarely shows up on a balance sheet but shapes the trajectory of the entire empire just as much as any acquisition does. Step 8. The billion-dollar empire. At $1 billion, the holding company owns businesses across industries that would have seemed unrelated at the very beginning. Software sits alongside manufacturing. Logistics sits alongside insurance. Healthcare, real estate, and consumer brands all generate cash flow that feeds the same central pool of capital. Institutional investors have taken interest. A family office has been established to manage the wealth for the long term, well beyond any single generation. Your role has changed completely from where this story started. You are no longer managing employees or selling products day to day. You are allocating capital, deciding where the next dollar should go to produce the best long-term return across dozens of businesses instead of one. This is the transition from entrepreneur to capital allocator, and it is a different skill entirely from the one that got you started, even though nothing about this outcome was possible without that first skill years earlier. Looking back across the entire journey, certain moments stand out more clearly than the dollar figures ever could. The first employee who believed in a business that barely existed yet. The first profitable year that proved the model actually worked. The first acquisition that nearly did not happen. The first hired chief executive who ran a business better than you ever could have alone. The first $100 million acquisition, a number that once would have seemed impossible from where you started. These moments mark the real progression of the story, far more than any single valuation ever could, because they represent the specific decisions that made the compounding possible in the first place. What the number actually means. It would be easy to end this story at $1 billion, because that is the number that grabs attention and fits neatly into a headline. But ending there misses the actual point of everything that came before it. The real achievement was never the valuation itself. It was building a system that continues to grow on its own, independent of any single business, independent even of you. The founder who started with one profitable business years earlier could not have predicted every acquisition, every hired executive, or every industry the empire eventually touched. What they built instead was a mechanism, a way of turning cash flow into ownership, ownership into more cash flow, and more cash flow into further ownership, repeated so many times that the outcome eventually became almost inevitable. This is the part that separates empire builders from people who simply run one successful business for decades. The goal was never to own one great company. It was to build a system where every business helps create the next one, allowing wealth to compound not for a few years but for decades. There is a version of this story that ends with a founder who never let go of control, who insisted on personally running every business, who trusted no one else to make decisions. That founder often builds something respectable, profitable, and permanently limited by their own personal capacity. There is another version, the one this story followed, where the founder learns to step back, build systems, and trust capital allocation over personal effort, and that version is the only one that ever reaches a scale this large. None of this happened quickly, and none of it happened without real risk along the way. There was a first acquisition that nearly fell apart. There was a first year where a hired executive underperformed and had to be replaced. There was a stretch where growth stalled and it was unclear whether the model would keep working at a larger scale. Every one of those moments tested whether the underlying system was strong enough to survive contact with reality, and every time, the answer came down to whether capital kept being reinvested with discipline instead of pulled out for comfort. It would have been easy, at almost any stage along the way, to stop and simply enjoy the success already achieved. A profitable single business is already more than most people ever build. A $10 million company is already a remarkable outcome by any reasonable standard. The empire only exists because at each of those comfortable stopping points, The decision was made to keep reinvesting instead of settling, to keep treating the current success as fuel for the next stage rather than as a finish line worth resting at. Business empires are built through systems, disciplined capital allocation, and long-term compounding. They are not built by simply working harder than everyone else, and they are certainly not built by chasing the next flashy idea instead of strengthening the one that already works. They are built the same way a small business becomes a large one, and the same way a large business becomes an empire, one reinvested dollar at a time, repeated for long enough that the compounding eventually becomes the entire story. The first business you build will never look like a billion-dollar company while you are building it. It will look ordinary, occasionally stressful, and far too small to matter to anyone outside your own life. That is exactly how every empire on this list once looked too, before cash flow became ownership, before ownership became acquisitions, and before acquisitions became something far larger than any single person could have built alone. If there is a single idea worth carrying away from this entire progression, it is that the size of the empire was never determined by the size of the original idea. It was determined by how consistently profit got turned back into ownership, year after year, decade after decade, long after the excitement of the first success had faded into routine. That is the part almost nobody shows, and it is the part that actually built everything.